Howdy, everyone. We're going to let the room fill up. I'm going to adjust my camera so I can get my head nice and centered, give you a nice view of the books behind me, and we'll get started in a second. All right. As it fills up, I will just, I'll say hello to everybody. It's been a couple weeks since I did one of these. It's good to be back virtually with everyone. I hope everybody is doing well, both themselves, their loved ones, their friends, their coworkers. Everyone is well and healthy and managing as well as can be in kind of where we are with the world today, which is the topic of the day. That is kind of where we are with businesses, with stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders, and with the reopening plans that are starting to roll out around the country, including where I am in Ohio with our governor that announced our state's reopening plan tomorrow. So here's the agenda for where we're going to be today. We are going to okay, just making sure all the settings are set correctly. I'll give you kind of a quick rundown of kind of where we are with the stay-at-home and or reopening orders, kind of my thoughts on what businesses should be doing, government mandates or no government mandates to reopen safely. And then I will, there's been a ton of questions that came in advance. If you have questions for me, I invite you to type them in the chat box, and I will do my best over the course of the next hour to answer all the questions that came in advance. And then additionally, whatever questions come in during the time we have today. And then as promised, my daughter said she would come in and share a song with everybody, as has become tradition for these little Zoom meetups at the end of the hour. Let's see. Okay. So where are we? Yesterday, at least in Ohio, where I am located, Governor DeWine announced his plan to what he's calling responsibly reopen the state. It is a phased rollout consistent with the guidelines put out with the White House in terms of what we are going to be reopening here in Ohio. I was nervous to see what this plan looked like. I am not convinced that given the that we are supposed to have a 14-day downward trend before we reopen, and we're only at 5 here in Ohio. I'm nervous that we might be doing this too soon. I am going to be watching the statistics both here, given our more narrow rollout of what's reopening versus states that are going to have more broad reopenings like Georgia and Texas that are having more broad-based reopenings of their businesses. Texas that's reopening restaurants, Georgia that's reopening tattoo parlors and bowling alleys, to see what the viral spread looks like in Ohio versus those states. It is, at least in Ohio, we're going to see businesses reopen initially in 3 phases. We're going to have, starting on Friday, non-essential medical procedures that don't involve an overnight stay in the hospital. Dental offices and veterinary offices are going to reopen. And then on Monday, we're going to have non-essential manufacturers and distributors and offices and construction reopen. And then on the 12th of May, we're going to have retail and service providers reopen. Remaining closed are entertainment venues, our restaurants, our daycares, schools, and then barbershops, salons, spas, and the like. The governor has, I think, wisely limited the first phase of reopening, which he is staggering in the parts I just detailed. He's limiting it to kind of the non-essential aspects of those businesses that we have experienced being open as essential businesses in Ohio under the stay-at-home order. So we have experience with essential manufacturing. We're going to broaden it to non-essential manufacturing. We have experience with essential retail. We're going to broaden it to non-essential retail. We have experience with offices staying open for essential businesses. We're going to broaden that to non-essential and the like. And so we're going to take the experience that we've had with essential businesses and we're going to transition that to non-essential businesses, see where we are, and then see where we go moving forward, assuming the spread stays. We don't see an uptick in cases. My assumption is, although I don't have this on any real knowledge, our assumption or any inside knowledge that by mid-June we'll start to see things like restaurants reopen under very strict guidelines. The guidelines that the state has put in place in Ohio to reopen is masks are 100% required. The state has said no masks, no work, no service, no exceptions. So masks are going to be required to work or to enter any place of business starting on May 1st, period. No exceptions, no questions asked. As I wrote this morning, the science really backs us up, and I don't believe that any legitimate reopening or restart plan would make sense without having mandatory masking or face coverings in place. The science shows that if everybody in public wears masks, you can reduce the spread of this virus almost to zero. And so to me, any reopening plan that does not require the mandatory masking of everybody out in public, I think is doomed to fail. I heard our lieutenant governor speak on Friday, and he seemed to indicate that masking was not going to be required, which gave me a lot of concern. I was happy to see that the plan now requires masking, and from a best practices standpoint, if you're in a state that is not mandating masking for a business of people coming into a business, either from a employee standpoint or a non-employee customer vendor, whatever standpoint, I would recommend that you require masks nonetheless, that you make that a condition of people coming back to work. Other guidelines that Ohio has put in place, daily health assessments. You can do this in one of two ways. You can ask employees to complete a self-health evaluation. Do you have any of the following symptoms? Do you have shortness of breath? Do you have a temperature over 100.4 Fahrenheit? Do you have a cough, etc.? And require people to turn that piece of paper in that they sign before they come into work every day. Or you can, like a lot of businesses are doing, having temperature checking stations as a precondition to people entering the workplace. Someone stands at the door or inside the door with a thermometer, you're winding people's foreheads, and you're requiring that as a condition to them before they're allowed to enter the workplace. Either one is fine, either is permissible or acceptable. The EEOC has said that because coronavirus is a pandemic, it is classified as a direct threat under the ADA, and because you are screening for whether employees have the virus, they would pose a direct threat if they enter your workplace. And so all the rules regarding medical examinations or medical questions of employees are kind of out the window in regards to coronavirus. And so you can take temperatures, you can require temperature taking, you can ask questions of employees. If an employee has a temperature, you can isolate them and send them home and not allow them to come back to work until they are 72 hours symptom-free or have 2 negative coronavirus tests within 24 hours. And those are the CDC guidelines for return to work of someone who's tested positive. All the things you can require the EOC is fine with, because the EEOC says coronavirus is a direct threat. Other things we should be doing, the state of Ohio requires employers to be doing, requiring good hygiene habits at all times, which the state classifies as hand washing, sanitizing, and social distancing. What are we doing in terms of social distancing? Things like staggering shifts so that you're limiting the number of people that are working at any given time. Either limiting the number of people who are in the workplace so that if people are working in cubes or carrels, they're not on top of each other, next to each other, or putting up plexiglass between cubes to provide kind of artificial distance between people, closing break rooms or lunch rooms, or limiting or staggering break and lunch time so that people aren't, you don't have mass gatherings in break rooms or lunch rooms at the same time. For retail establishments and offices, my state has said that occupancy, to maintain social distance, occupancy should be limited to 50% of whatever the maximum capacity for a facility is. So that's what at least Ohio has said from a social distancing, and in terms of all the other things like staggered shifts and limited breaks and lunches and whatnot. The other thing that businesses should be doing from a social distancing standpoint is, to the extent that you have employees currently working from home, keep employees working from home. If you don't need people in the workplace, there's no reason to have people continuing. There's no reason to stop that. There's no reason to have people coming into work if they are at home and working efficiently and effectively from home. Keep them at home for the time being. We don't need people unnecessarily crowding the workplace. And so if work from home is working for you and for your employees, maintain it, at least in the short term, at least until we get further guidance in terms of where this virus is from a spread standpoint. The more we can do to limit our interaction with other people, the better. Cleaning and sanitizing is always, my state says is required and is always a good idea, to the extent you are getting cleaning crews in an office on a daily basis. Retail is cleaning up to every hour, but to clean, sanitize, and disinfect workplaces, surfaces, to limit or prohibit shared phones, shared equipment, and whatnot, things we can do again to help limit the spread of this virus. And then again, limiting capacity, maximum capacity at 50% of the fire code, using appointments where feasible so that we don't have kind of masses of people coming in to facilities at a given time. If you are a customer facing business, rather than just being open for business and having people come in mass, if feasible and practical, set appointments to limit the number of people coming in and to potentially limit infections. So that's where my state is in terms of what's required and recommended. Other things that businesses should be thinking about for employees that are coming back to work. We should be thinking about, do you really need visitors coming into your business? Or can you operate for the time being without third parties coming into your business, right? Do you need non-employees? Do you need non-employees coming in? What are you doing from a travel perspective? Are you allowing employees to travel? Really bad idea. Or are you outright prohibiting travel? Or are you only allowing it on kind of mission critical trips. And if employees are traveling out of the workplace for business, out of state for business, what are you doing from a quarantine perspective when they come back, particularly if someone's been on an airplane? Are you requiring them to quarantine for 14 days when they come back from their trip? What measures does a business have in place to report when they are, when they are sick or experiencing symptoms of COVID-19? And then what are you going to do in the workplace if somebody actually does test positive? What are you doing from a contact tracing standpoint? What are you telling your other employees if someone they work with tests positive? What information are you giving out? And if someone has legitimately, depending on the size of the business, should you be shutting down if someone tests positive if you can't guarantee that everybody in the workplace is not necessarily free of the infection, given what we know about pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic transmission of the virus and how long it might take for symptoms to show up, 14 days. Should a business think about shutting itself down if you either can't contact trace, or if your contact tracing is so, or if you do contact trace and what you figure out is that this is spread enough through the workplace that you can't guarantee everybody's safety. One thing that my state is recommending is that employers look into alternate transportation for employees that are coming back to work that rely on mass transit. Employees might not feel comfortable taking mass transit, being on buses or trains or subways with other people in close proximity. How do you maintain social distance on mass transit, and how do you guarantee the surfaces are clean and sanitized? And so businesses that can't do work from home, that are having people come back to work, people rely on mass transit to get to work. We're encouraging businesses to look for other means to get people to the workplace. Maybe it's ride shares, maybe it's carpools, maybe it's shuttles or other things where we can control the number of people in the vehicles or in the modes of transportation. We can control their sanitization and cleanliness better than we can with mass transit, but things to do to get people to work other than mass transit. Well, those are kind of my initial thoughts on where we are from a returning standpoint, from a issues businesses should be thinking about. The other thing I think the businesses should absolutely be thinking about is how you're communicating your return to work plan to your employees. A lot of what businesses need to be doing is a lot of this comes down to your employees' comfort level with coming back to work. And how are you going to communicate to employees all the things that you are doing to help protect their safety, to help promote a healthy workplace, a sanitized and clean workplace as best you can. And so what I'm encouraging is getting a plan and protocol written in place that details all the measures a business is taking from a health and safety standpoint to help sanitize, guard against coronavirus in the workplace, and then communicating that out to employees. Letting employees know, look, you're above everything, your health and safety is paramount to us, is the most important thing to us. And this is everything that we are doing to protect you in this coronavirus environment. This is the social distancing that we're requiring. This is what we're going to do from a health, coronavirus screening standpoint. These are the measures we're taking in terms of remote or telework for employees that are eligible or where it's feasible. This is what we're doing to get people to work that rely on mass transportation. These are our hand washing and sanitizing standards. This is how often we're going to be washing the workplace down. Masks are required. You have to wear a mask when you come in. This is how we're changing our shift schedule so we don't have, so we can help maintain social distance. These are the things where, we're going to, limit one person in the restroom at a given time. We're putting up plexiglass in between cubicles. We are closing the lunchroom for the time being. Or we're taking tables out and we're limiting it to one person at a table. Things that businesses are doing from a health and safety standpoint to help promote their employees' health and safety, to protect them against infection at work. Communication is going to be key because everybody is scared. Everybody is scared of contracting coronavirus, and the more that you can communicate with your employees to let them know what you are doing to help protect them, the more comfortable they will be returning to work. Okay, those are my thoughts. With that, I want to turn to some questions that came in advance, and then we'll get to questions that people had, people are typing in the chat box as well. Some of the questions, there were multiple questions about the same topics. I'm going to try and combine them where possible, so I'm not just repeating myself. A lot of questions came in about masking, both before the governor made his announcement yesterday and here in Ohio, and after, in terms of are masks required, at least as I said, now in Ohio they are, and then if they're required, how are we going, what are our responsibilities as an employer or as a business? Do we have to provide the masks? Are we required to provide them? Who pays for them? You're not required to provide them. You are simply required to require them of your employees and visitors into your business. My recommendation, however, is that if you are, because you are requiring employees to wear masks, my recommendation is that you either provide them to employees or compensate the employees for the expense of providing them for themselves. These don't have to be N95 masks. They don't have to be medical grade masks. They don't have to be surgical masks. Cloth masks are fine. Like I wear a bandana around my face, bandito style, as if I'm robbing a bank in 1880s Wild West when I go to the grocery store. That's all employees need to do. Again, I posted on my blog today an article that I found in the Atlantic talking about, it's kind of a conglomeration of 19 different scientific studies, but talking about the effectiveness of simple cloth masks like a bandana. That shows that if everybody wears a simple cloth mask like a bandana, we can reduce the spread of this virus to a scientific zero, which is what we're trying to do. And so these don't have to be fancy medical grade masks, but they do have to be a face covering. I think employers should be providing them or at least compensating employees for the expense. How do we handle those employees who may feel nervous about returning? As I said, I think it's all about communication here. I think you need to go through the time and labor of putting a safety plan in place that will give your employees the comfort level that you are doing everything that you possibly can as a business to protect their safety, and then communicate that plan in a clearly written, common sense communication to your employees, explaining to them this is everything that we are doing. I don't think some training hurts either. For when employees come back to work on day one, you start with a training session so that everybody is on the same page in terms of what, not just what you are doing for them, but what is expected of them as employees coming into the business from a health and safety standpoint, so that there's no misunderstandings down the road. Everybody being on the same page. What if an employee refuses to come to work for fear of safety? Different issue. The CARES Act seems to make it clear, although I guess there is some vagueness in there, that an employee that quits his or her job out of fear of contracting coronavirus might be eligible for unemployment in that circumstance. So the CARES Act says that anyone who quits because of coronavirus is eligible for unemployment. I think there's a good argument to be made that if someone quits out of fear of their safety, that they are quitting because of coronavirus and is likely to be eligible for unemployment. Again, I think from an employer standpoint, it all comes down to communication. We need to communicate everything we can to our employees in terms of what we're doing to protect their safety, such that we are giving them as much confidence as we can that they are returning to a safe workplace. That's really the best you can do from a kind of assuaging employees' fear standpoint. Is the company liable if we provide masks and the employee gets the virus anyway? Or on the flip side, are we liable if we do not provide masks and an employee gets the virus? Liability is largely, at least for employees, should be limited by workers' compensation. That said, at least here in my state where masks are required, I can see a really good argument that potentially to take someone out of the workers' compensation system, because through what we refer to here as an intentional tort, if an employer does not require employees to wear the masks that the state says are required. I think there's a really good argument that if you are not requiring masking, you're ignoring the state's requirements, that you are potentially exposing yourself to liability outside the workers' compensation system if an employee gets sick. That said, I have real reservations that an employee will be able to establish causation if they get the coronavirus, given what we know about how widespread the virus is in the community and how people are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic carriers for up to 14 days before anyone would ever exhibit symptoms. It's going to be really difficult for an employee to establish causation, to say that an employee who contracts coronavirus to say, I'm sick and I got sick at work because my employer wasn't require masking. I think there is a potential, even if an employer is not requiring masking, I think there's a great kind of assumption of the risk defense that the state is saying that masks are required, you chose not to wear one, and so you assume the risk you were going to get sick. And additionally to that, there's a real causation issue here, that how does an employee prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the workplace was the exposure where the employee got sick? That said, and while I don't think I can't guarantee that masking is a shield from liability, I do think that if a state says wear a mask and you require employees to wear masks and you're doing everything else that the state says you should be doing or you have to be doing as part of a return to work protocol, that would be, as good a shield against liability as I think one could probably craft up in this situation. Another potential avenue for liability that I could envision, if you are not requiring masking, would be an employee would call up OSHA and blow the whistle on you with OSHA to say, an employer has a general duty to provide under OSHA to provide a safe workplace for me. The state says we have to wear masks. The employer is not requiring them. They're violating their general duty obligations under OSHA. And maybe an OSHA investigator comes in to investigate what's going on, why masks aren't being required. So a couple of different potential avenues for liability here, one specifically to employees under workers' comp, or maybe an exception to workers' comp for some intentional action by the employer, or maybe under OSHA. Are there any jobs exempt from the masking requirements, such as receptionists? Not that I've seen, at least not here in Ohio. I have to say I have not done a deep 50-state survey of what all the masking requirements are in every state, but at least here in Ohio, our governor has said no masks, no work, no service. Masks are 100% required. How that's going to work for people like receptionists, it's hard to say. You might need to, they may need to, speak through the mask. They might need to get a headset where a microphone will go on, will go underneath the mask and go closer to their face. The point is that there are supposed to be no exceptions here. Employees are supposed to be masked at all times when in the workplace, when in your facility. No exceptions, period. A couple of questions relating to lack of childcare for COVID-19 related reasons. That's one of the big gaping holes that I see in all of these states that are currently returning to work, in that right now, at least in Ohio, schools are closed, childcare, daycare centers and other childcare providers are still unavailable. We're not supposed to be gathering in groups of more than 10 anyway. Obviously, open workplaces notwithstanding, but what are working parents supposed to do if you have kids at home, childcare is unavailable, and you're being told to go back to work? The Families First Coronavirus Response Act provides some guidance here, in that at least for businesses with less than 500 employees, lack of childcare is a qualifying reason for an individual to take both the paid sick leave and the expanded family medical leave under the FFCRA. For the expanded family medical leave, that is net of any FMLA an employee has already used during the current FMLA year. So it's possible that an employee who had an FMLA qualifying absence earlier in the year might not have any FMLA left to take this childcare related leave. At some point, specifically if someone started taking this childcare related leave on April 1 when the law went into effect, June 30th, their leave is going to run out. We don't know if childcare centers, camps, daycare providers, what have you, are going to reopen by June 30. So it's possible after June 30, childcare still won't be available. And even if someone had their full 12 weeks of EFMLA available, they're not going to have it anymore because it's expired. So I said this last time I did this too. I keep doing this. And so I realized I'm kind of here by myself in my home with my family. And so none of us have coronavirus that we know of, but I'm so self-conscious now when I do this. And I'm looking at myself in the camera, where I probably shouldn't be doing. Anyway, and so that is a real problem. And I think return to work plans that don't account for childcare issues are going to have real problems getting people back to the workplace. And how we account for that, I don't know. One thing I think businesses should be doing, as I said before, continuing to be flexible with work from home arrangements so that people with children can continue to work from home to care for their children. But that said, it is a real problem because it's two competing issues, right? We're asking employees on the one hand, come back to work. But on the other hand, if you have little kids that can't care for themselves, what do we do? Because we can't send them to school and we can't send them to daycare. And we probably can't send them to grandma's house either because grandma's over 65 and high risk. So how do we fix that tension? The EFMLA that allows for childcare related paid leave, gives us some guidance. But again, that might not help every employee, because you might have more than 500 employees, and if we aren't covered by the FFCRA, someone might not have FMLA leave left to take, or come June 30, it's going to expire. Let's see. Where was I? I'm being asked to develop a contact training protocol. Any advice or suggestions on how we do that? Yeah, my recommendation would be get a professional to do it. Contact tracing is important here, because if someone comes down with the coronavirus, we want to know everybody that they've come in contact with. But you internally in HR or in a business might be limited in what you can do. I mean, you should be, at least internally within the business, you want to at least figure out everybody that an individual potentially came in contact with, so you can then send them home for the 14-day quarantine period, and then so that you can guarantee as best you can that an individual who in your workplace who has COVID-19, you're limiting the spread within the workplace. It gets trickier, and we're probably not focusing on issues outside the workplace, like friends, family, businesses they went into, and what have you. But it is something that businesses are going to have to do. You really should get trained on how to do this, or if you can't, or if you're not trained on how to do this properly, bring in a third party to help you or do it for you. The ADA might limit what you can say to individuals, so you might not be able to say, Bob Jones has coronavirus, but you might be able to say that somebody you potentially may have come in contact with here at work tested positive for COVID-19. We're recommending that you go home for 14 days self-quarantine, and then if you don't have symptoms, come back to work in 14 days. But the best place to start is with the employee himself or herself, to figure out everybody within your business that he or she might have come in contact with, so that you can best figure out how far the virus might have spread within your workplace. Let me see. Do I recommend checking temperatures of each employee each day once we reopen? That's certainly a best practice, is to set up a temperature checking station for employees on their way in the door. The best practice is you have employees fill out a kind of medical self-assessment every day, reporting their own symptoms, and get wanded on their way in the door. And then if anybody has a temperature, you immediately send them home. Don't let them enter the facility. And then go into your contact tracing to figure out who else they might have been in contact with, if that individual in fact does test positive for COVID-19. Certainly a best practice. We don't want to lull ourselves into a false sense of security, however, that a temperature check is going to reveal to us everyone who potentially has COVID-19, because again, we know that people are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic carriers, but a temperature certainly check is certainly one recommended best practice to figure out who does, to limit the spread within your workplace. The second part of that question was, how do we balance the privacy concerns? The answer is, right now there really aren't any. I mean, the EEOC has said that, again, because you're preventing a direct threat from entering your workplace, the privacy and confidentiality issues of this type of medical screening just frankly don't really exist anymore. And so there's those concerns don't really exist. Another question about masking. What about complaints about masks that fog up glasses? The straps burn my ears after a few hours. I'm claustrophobic. Deal with it in the short term is the best I can say. At least here in Ohio, again, masks are mandatory. Employees cannot take them on or off. If someone is feeling claustrophobic because they're wearing their mask or need a break because they're hurting their ears, I mean, the best they can do, leave the facility, go to their car, take the mask off, give themselves a 5 or 10 minute break, and then put it back on. In terms of fogging up glasses, I mean, I get it. I wear contacts, but I do also wear glasses. And so I understand how kind of the breathing up through the mask could fog. So I get that. A good tight fit on a mask would certainly prevent the air from blowing up and fogging the glasses. So I get that as well. But again, allowing employees just the short break to take their glasses off, let them defog, put them back on, things like that. We have an employee that lives out of state but has been working from home. Should we impose so this is someone, I'm guessing a business kind of on a state border, or close to a state border. Should we impose any out-of-state requirements on her when she comes back into the office? I think it depends on what she's been, kind of what the exposure tells us in the state where she is. If it was New York City, I would say absolutely. In a more rural area or an area that doesn't have such widespread exposure, if they are working from home and they can kind of certify where they've been and what they've been doing and they don't have any symptoms, I'm not sure that's 100% necessary to impose like a quarantine when they come back to the office, assuming we have good information that the person doesn't have any symptoms, hasn't been around anybody that has any symptoms. Kind of get the same information we should be getting from all of our employees. I'm not sure that banning them or limiting them from coming back is required at this time. I mentioned facial masks are a requirement. Is it facial masks or facial coverings, i.e. scarves, okay as well? I'm using masks generically, but it doesn't have to be an actual like surgical mask or medical grade mask. Any facial covering is fine. It could be a scarf, it could be a bandana, it could be a folded up t-shirt. It's something covering an employee's mouth and nose. That's what is required. If we as a company can, if we as a company can keep people working remotely, but someone wants to come into the office to begin working instead and is a bus rider, do we have to provide him or her with alternative transportation, or can we require them to provide their own transportation or continue to work from home? All employees have access necessary to do their work from home. The state of Ohio has said that alternate transportation is a recommended best practice, but not a requirement. I would say if the employee can work from home in the short term, that he or she should continue to work from home rather than riding public transportation. If they're required to come into work and they have to ride public transportation, then the state says things like stipends for alternate private transportation is a recommended best practice, but again, not required. If public transportation is the only way for someone to get to the office, then or to the place of business, then that might be the only option available to them. If you don't want to provide stipends for private transportation, you don't have to. That's recommended, not required. Do we have to provide training on masks like we train on PPE? Do I think the masks are PPE? I don't think the masks are PPE in the OSHA definition of PPE. But that said, this is all going to be new for employees, and I think a little bit of training in terms of what is their safe usage and what is expected of employees is going to go a long way. And so I think training is an absolute best practice here. Your employees are not going to be used to wearing masks around the workplace. Again, up until, at least here in Ohio, up until yesterday, they were recommended. Now they're required. And so I think a little bit of training here is going to go a long way to giving everybody a comfort level that these things are being used. These things are being used the right way. My company is an essential business and we've been open the whole time without masks, except those that want to wear them. Should our policy now change to require them? Yeah, if you're in Ohio, the answer is absolutely yes, they're required. If you're not in Ohio, I would tell you to check with your state for what your state's protocols are for masking or face coverings. But in Ohio, the rules have changed for businesses with masks and facial coverings. They are absolutely required, no questions asked, period. Whether you're an essential business and non-essential business, whatever, if you are open for business and people are coming into your business, employees, customers, vendors, third parties, whomever, masks must be worn, no questions asked. Doesn't the child care leave qualification include most workers who are at home with their kids? Do I have to provide this as HR, or can we just continue to create that flexibility around work from home? The child care leave qualification, employees don't qualify for leave for child care related purposes under the FFCRA if there is someone else in the home that is available to care for the child, which would mean, for example, if you can work a remote work schedule around an employee working from home, that would allow the employee to work from home under a flexible schedule to where their leave doesn't, they can continue working without the leave being triggered. So if you can work a flexible work schedule such that employee is working from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then they're off during the school day so they can help homeschool their child, and then they're finishing their work in the evening. None of that's going to qualify for paid leave under the FFCRA. You've built a flexible work schedule to allow the employee to care for their child during some hours and then do their work during other hours. The FFCRA is only triggered when an employee cannot do their job because of childcare related closures and related responsibilities. So the answer is, if you can build flexibility around work from home, that's great. It will allow the employee to continue working full time, not tap into any leave, and then take time as needed to help care for their children. What do we do if an employee refuses to wear a mask or employees keep taking them off during the day? I mean, it's a work rule violation. I would say discipline, counsel, discipline, and terminate kind of as a last resort. But employees have to wear them, no questions asked. If employees aren't wearing them, an employee's call could be to the Department of Health or to OSHA, which could get an investigator into your workplace to figure out why you're not enforcing work rules surrounding masking or facial coverings. I think because these are required now, at least here in Ohio, if employees aren't wearing them or they're taking them off during the workday, or they're, pulling them down so they're not covering their face and their mouth and nose appropriately, I think step one is you counsel. Well, I back up. I would say step one would be ask yourself, did we give employees training on what the expectations are on the proper wearing of masks? If not, I would train. If so, then it's counseling. Look, the rules are the rules. You got to wear your mask, period. You can't be taking it on and off during the workday. It's supposed to be on at all times. If that counseling doesn't work, then I would move to discipline. And if the discipline doesn't work, then I think termination, while harsh here, if you have a serial offender that's just not going to comply with the requirement, despite training and counseling and warnings, then I think your only obligation at that point is to treat it like any other safety or work rule violation, and terminate. How are high-risk employees protected if they are over 65, have moderate asthma, diabetes, etc., if they can work from home but are needed or feel they are needed in the workplace, or worried about losing their job if they don't come in? I think there's a couple of issues here, one of which is the potential underlying disability issue. And I think that if you have an employee with an underlying medical condition that makes them high risk for COVID-19, I think that is a reasonable accommodation, dialogue, interaction you have with the employee to say, particularly if the employee says, I'm not comfortable coming to work because of the infection, what do I do? Or because of the risk for infection, because of the underlying medical condition. I think it is a conversation you have with the employee to say, what can we do? Can you work from home? If you can't work from home, is a leave of absence until this thing blows over, or we can safely get you back to the workplace. It's a conversation with the employee through the interactive process to figure out what you can do for that employee, because the employee has some underlying medical issue that will enable them to either continue working or get back to work at some point in the future. Restart Ohio program requires employers to report infections to the local health department. What would define an infection? A confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis, someone directed by a medical provider to get a test, someone with a cough, etc. I don't know. My assumption based on the term infection is a positive COVID-19 test that must be reported. I assume we'll get more guidance from the governor's office as I'm tuning into his press conferences every day at 2 o'clock. I will be again today. And so hopefully we'll get some guidance from the governor's office as to what an infection that requires a report to the Department of Health. But my assumption, because it's using the term infection and not suspected infection or symptomatic, symptoms of an infection, that it is an actual positive COVID-19 test. What about sipping coffee and water all day? Take the mask on and off. All I can tell you is it's supposed to be on at all times. We've gotten no guidance in terms of what you're supposed to do to take a drink of coffee or to take a drink of water, or what you do during your lunch hour to eat lunch. The mask is supposed to be on at all times. I'm assuming there have to be allowances, for example, for you to eat, and that's going to depend largely, I think, on other social distancing measures that are in place, like in a lunchroom, for example, where we know we're not going to be within a distance of people to potentially spread this virus. We have allowed employees to remove their masks during the day only when they are in their office alone. If they go to community areas or someone comes to their office, they must put it on. Does this meet the spirit of the governor's order? I don't think it does. The governor's order is really clear. It says facial coverings must be worn at all times. There's no exception for when you're in your office by yourself. If you are not around any other people, facial coverings must be worn at all times. No mask, no work. No mask, no work, period. That's what the rule says. And so I don't think there's an exception for employees that are in their office by themselves. Because, for example, you can envision a situation where you're in an office, you sneeze, you're not wearing a mask, you sneeze, and then someone comes in, and then there's the kind of particulates that are either in the air or around on surfaces. And so for that reason, I think when the governor says no masks, no work, I think that is what is expected. No masks, no work. Okay. It is 11:55, so that is the time for me to wrap and turn it over to my very talented daughter who has agreed to yet again come in and play a song for everybody. She looks nervous today. Why are you nervous? Because it's not her own song. She's going to play a cover today of someone else's song. So everybody, did that chair just fall apart on me? Oh no. All right, well, let's get it back together. Thank you everybody for joining today. Do you want help? You sure? I'll do that so we block off some of the light. Everybody say hi to Norah. Norah, what are you going to be singing for us today? All 97s. Take it away, Norah.
Okay, he's got money, the money out to sell. He's got the grades, but he's not good for his work. I should be rolling in it. I've been working stuff. As for the justice, no one knows where it went. I'm gonna toil away until my judgment day. I will be rewarded for the good things I did. Believe me, every year there is another one here. Don't you see, I used to be the new kid. I am sorry to say you'll get carried away. Oh, you'll be replaced. You won't be replaced. I'll tell you again. Don't get too settled in. Oh, you'll be replaced. You will be replaced. He's got my girl, the girl I used to have. He's got the looks, you know, but not from his dad. I'll still be kissing that girl. We should be so in love. There is no justice, there's just dark stars above. I'm gonna soar away until my judgment day. I will be rewarded for the good things I did. Believe me, every year there's another one here. Don't you see, I used to be the new kid. Another one year. Don't you see, I used to be the new kid. I am sorry to say, don't get carried away. Oh, you'll be replaced. You'll be replaced. And I'll tell you again. So don't get too settled in. Oh, you'll be replaced. You'll be replaced by the new kid. Oh, the new kid. Oh, by the new kid. By the new kid. Welcome back to school.
Back to online school. thank you everybody for joining today. This is the biggest turnout ever. We had almost 300 people register and over 200 attend. So I'm really thankful for everybody who's participated in these Zoominars with me, who stuck with me through the early technical technical issues we had with the first couple as I kind of sorted out this new platform. And I'll do this again in a week or two, or as topics warrant, to get information out to everybody. Everybody have a great week. Everybody be healthy, be well, be safe, and I look for this posted on the coronavirus law blog, coronaviruslaw.blog, tomorrow or Thursday, I guess, for if you want to watch it again, or for those, I guess I'm saying for those who weren't able to attend, but you wouldn't know because you're not watching me talk now. So anyway, everybody have a great week. Again, be well, and I'll see everybody again soon. Thank you so much.